Hello and welcome to episode 41. This piece was written by the Gravelstone. If you like this video, be sure to visit his Instagram for more mini reviews. Before I begin, I'd just like to comment that this will be an in-depth video that covers a lot of lyrical content and meaning. So if you want to truly learn more about Atrocity Exhibition and all its tracks, stay right till the end. I promise it will be worth it. One thing every popular artist in music must deal with at some point in their life is fame, whether it be through avoiding the spotlight, spreading their message to a larger audience, or in most cases giving in to the excessive lifestyle that accompanies fame. Successful artists deal with mass attention in their own unique ways. It's fitting then that one of hip-hop's boldest voices, Danny Brown, confronted fame and how he found it on his 2016 album Atrocity Exhibition in a way that's wholly unique to himself. With most artists, the message of fame is pretty clear-cut. Either they feel that it has improved their life or it has harmed it. Because of tendencies for issues to appear alongside fame, the second or third album from a hip-hop artist is referred to as the More Money, More Problems album, named after the Notorious B.I.G. song of the same name from his sophomore album, Life After Death. It's apparent that fame acts as a double-edged sword for many in hip-hop, and all too often artists only focus on one side of fame. However, some artists like Danny Brown are able to examine the issue from both sides. Danny spent his youth with little wealth in one of the world's toughest cities, Detroit, Michigan. Because of his environment, Danny was forced to sell drugs in his community, and this led to many encounters with the law and Danny's exposure to the darkness within his environment. While the listener might assume that anything would be better than remaining in this violent community, fame actually opened up totally new problems for Danny. Atrocity Exhibition is Danny's More Money, More Problems album, but also his celebration of how far he's come. Countless times on the album, Danny celebrates the luxuries of his fame while also bringing up the many issues that arise out of these luxuries. The album shows Danny's journey to come to terms with and resolve both the positive and negative aspects of his fame, confronting dark realities along the way to his final conclusion on success. The album opens with a look at the sad reality of Danny's life. One major topic of the record is Danny's drug abuse, and the first track makes sure to highlight it. The song's title, Downward Spiral, is a reference to the ever-worsening state of Danny's life, and also a callback to a line from his first album, XXX. This line holds great significance within the album, and its message will make frequent appearances on the record. In this line, Danny says, "It's the downward spiral, got me suicidal, but too scared to do it, so these pills will be the rival." Throughout this track, Danny outlines how he's in a similar state to what he described on XXX. He's slipping into complete darkness within his life, but he's too afraid to commit suicide, opting to drown out his sorrows with drug use instead. The track opens with a set of lines that perfectly set up the album to follow. Danny says, "I'm sweating like I'm in a rave. Been in this room for 3 days, think I'm hearing voices. Paranoid and think I'm seeing ghosts." Danny begins the album already in the pitfalls of fame, currently drowning in his own excess. Surprisingly, the track is hopeful, as Danny says in the chorus that he needs to figure his life out. There's an acknowledgement there. This frames Downward Spiral as sort of a break in Danny's disastrous life, where he finally realizes the dark reality he's living in. Another important line in the song that helps to inform the rest of the album is seen where Danny says that he doesn't know the last time he's eaten, but he still eats other rappers like a fine steak. This creates an interesting connotation for Danny bragging through the album. While it may seem bold and proud, in reality Danny just uses his bragging as a way to mask his true pain. After Danny's desire to escape his current path, which was made clear in Downward Spiral, he sets about recalling his past mistakes and trying to figure out where he went wrong in his life. The track Tell Me What I Don't Know sees Danny showcasing when he believes his downward spiral truly began. On the track, he recounts a time when he was dealing drugs in his hometown of Detroit, Michigan. While many rappers glamorize this lifestyle of dealing drugs, Danny has no issues with revealing it for what it truly is, a disastrous profession that leads many youths to a quick death or a lengthy prison sentence. As Danny will show the listener throughout the album, while success did bring him the money he so desperately desired as a youth, it also led him to encounter many more problems. Fame was not the escape Danny had hoped it would be. In fact, it only made his spiral towards the bottom increase its speed. After the dark reality of his youth, Danny presented on the last track, he finally transitions to his present situation, Rolling Stone, which details his lifestyle after fame. The song's title builds on the idea of being a rolling stone. Danny's lifestyle allows him to push through the pain of his past, but it also causes him to push everyone else in his life away, leading to depression. The hook is sung by alternative artist Pete Noir, and this helps show where the album draws its influences. Danny's pulled from classic psychedelic and noise rock to create a sound that feels hazy and overwhelming. On Rolling Stone, Danny uses Petite's distinct voice and a heavy bass to give the track an ominous tone. Since the song is discussing the darkness of fame, the sound is fitting. Petite's hook outlines how a life of fame can lead to isolation by telling those around him to stay away because he's in his zone. This zone could either refer to making music or living the excessive lifestyle of fame. Isolation is found in both the pursuit of fame and in the success and in the indulgent acts of achieving it. And once one enters this cycle, it can be nearly impossible to escape, which is the issue. Danny's first verse showcases the reckless lifestyle he finds himself in the middle after gaining fame. He says that he's unsatisfied with his current life and that his past selling drugs caused him to lose his soul. And now he's only furthering his lifestyle of sin. Because of the dark past he experienced as a youth in Detroit, Danny now trusts no one and is haunted by his actions. This clashes with the wishes of those around him to just turn off his brain and mindlessly enjoy his fame until the eventual crash as such. Since Danny struggles with leaving his past behind, he turns to drugs to do it for him. These lyrics helps to reinforce the image that Danny's past was the real beginning of his downward spiral, and perfectly bridges the gap between the previous track and this one. The track's second verse leans more heavily into the idea of Danny's drug abuse. He says, "Bought hope, can't get change, lost my brain, going insane, self-medicate is how I cope," showing that his drug use is a natural progression of how he copes with his issues. When fame presented itself as not being the escape from the past that Danny so desperately desired, he turned to drugs to drown out the pain that this caused him. Really Dough is the first track on the album to heavily lean into the concept of Danny using bragging to mask his true pain. Danny opens the track with a manic verse discussing his fame. He begins the verse questioning the realness of those who talk down on him, and then rapping about the women he gets and the drugs he does. These open lines show where Danny is at in this point. He's confrontational and drowning in his lifestyle of excess. Danny's final lines on the verse are filled with contrast, specifically the contrast he feels between his life on the streets and his life of fame. He says that while he used to sell out all his drugs, it's now his shows that he sells out. It's clear that Danny's lifestyle is a continuation of his past, regardless of how different the two lifestyles may be. Therefore, it's fitting that Danny ends his verse with a proclamation of how he'll never return to the hood, and immediately follows it up with a line, continuing his confrontational attitude from the track's beginning. Danny is adamant that he's left behind the environment of his youth, but he's still trapped within the lifestyle of that youth, being the big paradox of this track. Before his verse, Kendrick makes a point to address the listener and tell them that while life can be hectic, it's important for them to remain strong, because he sees their pain and he's gone through a similar journey within his own life. Kendrick begins his verse by outlining how in a world where many make reckless decisions within their lives, specifically with money, he is cautious. These lines are essentially Kendrick calling out the reckless behavior that Danny and Ab-Soul embrace throughout their verses. Kendrick continues his verse by making boasts that appear on the surface to be about drugs and violence, but upon deeper inspection prove to be about his success and lyrical skills. This is a unique way to show that Kendrick's version of the boast made by Danny and Soul don't embrace their excessive lifestyle. Earl's verse is dark, hard-hitting and extremely confrontational, and sees him rapping about his drug use, dysfunctional relationships, and love for putting his chucks on your couch. The verse is a brutal return to form for the song and pushes the album further along its dark path. Throughout the last track, Danny made a point of referencing his past, and on the track Lost, he draws a connection from his past to his current life. The sad reality Danny reveals here is that in his youth he was selling drugs to gain success, but now as an adult he's doing drugs to cope with success. He also says that he's got nothing on his pinky ring, and later he puts on his robe to go out to the balcony. This is a callback to the line on Downward Spiral where Danny says he was only wearing his robe and pinky ring. The connection here is that Danny is slowly fulfilling the role he found himself on in Downward Spiral. His second verse on this track shows more of the reality of his situation. Danny says that he is mentally disturbed before quickly covering it up with bragging. This kind of bragging to hide the true situation is displayed by Danny all over the song and at the beginning of each verse. Danny ends the verse on a positive note, saying that he's setting an example for those from his hood by becoming successful and remaining true to himself. This gives the hook that follows this verse the connotation that Danny is hungry for success through rap and cooking up rhymes instead of drugs. However, as Danny has shown countless times throughout the album, his success didn't bring him happiness, only pain. So Danny's boast about setting an example for others are misled, and he only makes them to hide the reality of his situation that he's lost in his fame. It's a song about Danny's success and the pride he feels about it, despite there being a darker reality behind it. Ain't It Funny begins with Danny continuing the bragging he did on songs like Really Though. However, he struggles to keep on track after rapping about his drug use on Lost. He drops the line, "Mind skydive, sniffing bumps in the cockpit," and this shows that while he is destroying his life with his excessive ways, his mind is wandering to other places. He slowly begins to boast about the drug he's on, and realizes how detrimental they truly are to himself. He ends his verse by saying that the red carpets of fame mask his nosebleeds, which are caused by drug use. This is a clever way of saying that behind all his boasting, Danny is really just hiding his pain. Danny says that because of all his pain and suffering, he just wants to burn out instead of dying slowly. This mirrors Danny's line on XXX, where he said, "It's the downward spiral, got me suicidal but too scared to do it, so these pills will be the rival." Danny is too scared to commit suicide, so he relies on drugs to do it for him. Danny finds the humor in this situation, saying that the joke's on himself, but Satan is the one laughing, since Danny will undoubtedly go to hell for his behavior. Danny opens his final verse outlining what he's become. He's spiraling towards disaster and laughing at the devil all the way to hell. It's apparent that Danny sees the comedy of his life, and he is still burning out despite realizing his situation. He says that like many, drug use is an inherited trait for him, and he couldn't stop if he wanted to. So instead of confronting the dark pain of his reality and trying to change, Danny just uses drugs to block it out. He's using more drugs to wash away the darkness of his drug abuse. He also says that he needs rehab, but feels like it's for the weak. The whole song sees Danny finding the comedy within his destructive lifestyle, and specifically how with his success came drugs, which are the very thing destroying his life. Gold Dust shows the direct aftermath of Ain't It Funny, where he's now spiraling off the rails. The song's production shows how chaotic Danny's current state is, using a distorted guitar riff and booming drums to give the track its signature roaring sound. As per usual, Danny's Braggadocio quickly turns to dark confessions. Danny says that he's caught in a whirlwind of excess and living a life of sin and celebrity. In one line, Danny makes a direct callback to the track Ain't It Funny, saying, "Praying to the heavens, letting these devils get the best of me." On that track, Danny says that he saw the devil laughing at his pain and resolved to laugh at his pain as well, showing how in his spiral towards the bottom, Danny is giving in to a sinful lifestyle. Danny also ended the track asking for prayer since Satan is currently getting the best of him. Danny's second verse says that he's currently surrounded by people who want to get on his good side by giving him drugs. Ironically, they are actually harming Danny in their attempt to make him like them. Danny also says that there are many times when he should have died but survived due to the inherited drug tolerance in his family. After the dark realities of the past 2 years, Danny uses his third verse to show the excesses of his life, focusing on his name brand, accessories, and his hedonistic lifestyle. This shows that due to Danny's excess and blowing cash, he might find himself bankrupt and back in the dark environment of his youth. The track White Line serves as a complete shift from Gold Dust, where Danny struggled to follow manic beats, and see Danny's lyrics matching perfectly with the beat to create a twisted sort of nursery rhyme. While Danny brags of excess are more apparent here than ever, so too are his cries for help. Danny is in the thick of his bender, breaking free from his chaotic lifestyle just long enough to beg for help. Danny's first verse does just this, showing how Danny drinks and smokes too much and following it up with shallow brags about all the girls he gets. Yet again, Danny draws a comparison between the women he sees on tour and the drugs he's using, saying that they're both plentiful, and he's helpless to resist the lifestyle that they bring. The song's hook shows another fusion of Danny's pain and life of partying. Danny is helpless to resist the drugs he's taking, but still knows that they are destroying his life. The white lines Danny references on the song's title could either be a nod to white lines of cocaine associated with use of the drug, or the white lines drawn around the bodies at crime scenes associated with death. Danny shows how his drug use is leading to his death in his second verse, beginning by saying that because of his actions he's lost control of his life. The track begins The track begins with its hook, which sees Danny bragging about his wealth, but also saying that he spends it faster than he can count it. The implication here is that despite attaining money, Danny is helpless to use it for good since he's trapped. In the track's music video, this message is compounded, and Danny is strung up on chains to show that he's simply a puppet to the larger system. Danny also includes images of former President Ronald Reagan in this video, who helped to filter cocaine into black communities to weaken them. Danny is feeling the effects of these choices nearly 30 years later in the form of his addiction, and while Danny's drug abuse is primarily a result of his actions, many external factors play a role in it, such as the Reagan presidency. From this point forward, Danny alternates at random between Braggadocio and his reality. This is used to show how, after gaining money, Danny feels the need to brag about and flaunt his success, since he's been through times when he's had nothing. Danny ends his verse on an interesting line saying that he's trying to stay afloat through his hectic lifestyle. Danny is very literally drowning in excess on pneumonia, and while he refuses to admit it, Danny is trapped in a system of drug use and black disenfranchisement that has taken so many others before him. While Danny's manic bender has been displayed in many ways on the album so far, like in the chaos of Gold Dust, the deranged ramblings of white lines and painful excesses of pneumonia, Dance in the Water shows the peak of his reckless lifestyle. On the surface, the track serves as a party track, much like how the previous track was brag rap on the surface. This shows that as Danny spirals deeper and deeper into his lifestyle, he begins to lose the distinction between who he is and who he portrays in his music. And due to this transition from persona to persona, Dance in the Water takes a sharper turn into simple excess than the other tracks on the album. The track's verses show how Danny is speaking directly to the listener and telling them to dance, but also speaking to himself and describing partying as a form of escape. Danny's escaping from his wild lifestyle by partying all the time, another paradoxical statement. This is seen plainly in the hook when Danny says, "Dance in the water and not get wet." This is a reference to the dancing Danny is doing while partying, but also it means to surround oneself in something without feeling its effects. This is applicable to Danny's lifestyle and how he's engulfed in a life of dangerous experience, but is somehow avoiding death. The track sees Danny at the peak of his chaotic lifestyle, and if he can't find a way to change it, eventually it will all come crashing down around him. In this moment of weakness, on the track From the Ground, Danny thinks back to his time as a youth in Detroit. This memory serves as both a point of strength and weakness for Danny on the album. Danny's youth outlined a lot of his best traits, such as his work ethic and his ambition, but it also made Danny a darker person through his criminal behavior and the foundation of this downward spiral. Overall, Danny's youth is a difficult subject for him, and he makes that clear on the track. His first verse begins by showing the good of his youth, specifically how he was able to rise out of nothing and build a life for himself and those he loves. However, later in the same verse, Danny shows just how his life as a youth negatively affected him. He says that because of how awful his environment was, he's now terrified to go back. Danny begins his second verse with a powerful question. Would you sacrifice your dreams? What it takes if you need anything? Danny is drawing a parallel to his own life with this question. He sacrificed the stable life of moderate fame so he could constantly pursue money. He asks the listener this question to show the relatability of his situation. He had to sacrifice the life he desired to get those he loved out of a dangerous environment. The end of Danny's verse makes many observations about how he views the world. He says that it's a cold place, but it becomes hot when one dies. This shows how Danny avoids the cold pain of the world by burning up in his push towards death. He ends his verse with a line that ties directly into the next song. He says, "Was trapped in the storm, but I made it out in the rain." Danny is ignoring the terrible life he's living currently by saying that he's already made it out into a much worse life, which he calls the storm. However, as Danny has reminded the listener all over the album, it wasn't as clear-cut as this. The issues of Danny's youth simply grew into new forms after his rise to fame. The next track explores this deeply. Danny's youth was one that was filled with confrontation, and this confrontational attitude transferred to his adulthood in many ways. Because of the violent and deadly life he lived as a youth in Detroit, He's also now hesitant about trusting anyone. Danny continues his verse, firing off the dark system that traps him, saying that a flower can't be expected to grow without water. Danny was never pushed to grow into a better person. In fact, the negative things around him were only compacted after his rise to fame. He says that he's stuck in the rain without an umbrella, but the rain is bullets, representing his inability to escape the violence all around him. This idea is compounded by the song's hook, which says that when it rains, get on the floor. This is a reference to how it's important to duck when bullets rain down, but also how Danny avoids the rain by dancing and partying all his problems away. Danny's second verse mirrors his first. He begins by bragging about his excessive and confrontational lifestyle, but he also tinges the verse with dark admissions of the very violence he decreed in the song's first verse. On one hand, it's referencing Danny's life as a youth and the violence he experienced, and on the other hand, it's about how Danny drowns out the dark realizations he's made about his life as an adult. The track Today builds on the mini-narrative Danny has been constructing since the track From the Ground about his youth and how it informs his present. Today shows how Danny's view of his environment changed after he gained fame. The first verse uses an interpolation of the Outkast song B.O.B. that details the conflict Outkast dealt with after gaining fame. He knows that these issues are present, but he feels helpless to change them. The song's hook outlines issues of both Danny's past and present life, saying that one never knows when it will be their time to go. Danny says that because of this he cheated in life. As a child, Danny took shortcuts in order to gain fame and get out of the hood. Now, as an adult, he still has the same mindset, sidestepping important issues within his life in the hopes that he can just burn out. Danny's second verse sees him fearful of those who might attempt to take his wealth, and here he brings up his own violence. Without looking at the world through a wider lens, Danny will never be able to right these wrongs within himself, even if he acknowledges that they're present. He ends his verse on a dark note, saying that the path of violence he's currently on will either lead him to death or jail. Danny has seen far too many people fall victim to these paths in the past, and if he doesn't change, all his hard work and success will have been for nothing. Danny's first verse on Get High lists his love for getting high, but also his love for classic jazz artists. Danny idolizes these artists of a bygone era, and in many ways he's a continuation of classic jazz. Danny manic rapping and production matches the genius playing of the classic artists that Danny describes it. Danny believes that there's no other option but to smoke away his life and have his legacy live on like it did for the jazz musicians that he admires. However, these jazz musicians' legacies were not born out of their deaths, but rather from the great art that they created. Danny feels like there's no hope for himself for now, and is resolving to die soon, like the jazz musicians he listened to. Be Real's hook shows how Danny uses drugs to drown out all his issues, saying that rolling up is the quick and easy way to make stress go away. Danny's following verse compounds this message. Danny lists various issues that are extremely serious but brushes them off by saying, just get high. The final line of this song does a great job of outlining the themes of the whole track, and Danny saying, trying to chop you down, so roll up the trees. After reflecting on all the issues within his life, Danny feels that he should just ignore them. The pain of attempting to right the parts of his life that have gone wrong are just too much to bear, and Danny seemingly accepts defeat and returns down this downward spiral. The whole album so far has been building towards one specific moment. The moment when Danny decides if he wants to make a positive change in his life or continue on a path of self-destruction. While an outsider might think that this is an easy choice, Danny complicates the decision throughout the album. While taking a step towards self-betterment, which is a good idea, Danny is already deeply in the darkness he described on the album. Trying to pull away from this lifestyle could lead to further depression or the end of Danny's success. Due to all these factors, it's not hard to see how Danny could have ended the album on Get High, where he accepted his defeat, resolving to live out the rest of his days without pain or worry and burn up, having his legacy remembered like that of classic jazz artists he idolizes. However, in the album's final moments, Danny decides to keep fighting. On Hell For It, he admits that he's lived a life of sin and darkness, but says that he refuses to go out like so many want him to. He'll fight to keep his success and his life. He recalls a time when he was trapped in the hood, desperately wishing to escape thought rap, and now he sees that not much has changed. He's still trapped in a dire situation, so he must work his way out of it. He no longer denies the darkness of his past, saying that was all necessary so he could make it out of his environment, even though he regrets his actions now. Danny uses a Muslim's religious phrase in his verse meaning submission to God, but butchers it, instead using random English words. This is to show that while Danny may have trouble getting it right, he's taking steps towards resolving his life and bringing himself closer to God. It's not a full transformation, but it's a step in the right direction. Danny also brings up his love for doing drugs, which cause him to ignore serious problems within his life, and then recalls a time as a youth where he was forced to work hard for success and change. The message here is that Danny plans to start taking action to resolve his issues instead of just drowning them out with substances. His hook is a defiant declaration of his determination. He says that he'll rail against all those who would hold him back, even if it kills him. His second verse is an honest look into his past. Danny knows he was plagued by demons and blamed them out with others for his situation when it was truly his fault. He now tries to right these wrongs and find strength in unity with God. Finally, Danny admits that his past makes him hard to listen to. Many may want to ignore him simply because they think he smokes crack, and while he may not have everything right in his life, he wants people to learn from his example and listen to the advice he has to share. Danny ends the album with a final message about the music industry as a whole. He knows that in today's world, messages and lyricism aren't as valued as much as they should be, but now he's learned to come to terms with that. He'll never try to be someone he's not, and he'll keep making music that's honest and that he feels holds value. Danny has reflected on his life throughout the album, and now he's ready to move on to the next stage of his life. He knows there will be obstacles along the way, and that the journey won't be easy, but he's ready to confront all of the factors that have dragged him down and give them hell for what they've done.